On the edge of the murky Thames, where the city's filth meets the empire's gold, stands a palace that redefined the night. The Savoy, a gleaming monolith of white stone rising from the London soot. 8 stories of electric brilliance and reinforced concrete. A private cul-de-sac guards the approach, separating the masters from the masses. 268 rooms behind curtains heavy enough to smother the truth. London is a city that breathes through its river, a dark artery of commerce and filth that has divided the metropolis for 2 millennia. But in the late 19th century, the banks of the Thames were not a place of leisure but of industrial clamor and the stench of raw history. It was here, upon this mud-slicked edge of the empire, that a vision began to rise from the debris of the Savoy Palace, a medieval ruin long since surrendered to fire and time. The year was 1889, a time when the British Empire was stretching its arms to the breaking point, covering the globe in red on the map while its capital choked on coal smoke and poverty. Yet, amidst the soot and the horse manure of the Strand, a structure of white stone and electric light began to take shape, promising something that London had never truly possessed: a sanctuary of absolute, uncompromising luxury. This was not merely a building. It was a declaration of war against the gloom of Victorian London. To understand the Savoy Hotel is to understand a fundamental paradox of the British elite, which is the desire to be seen while simultaneously hiding everything that matters. The hotel was positioned perfectly, a fortress of comfort standing with its back to the chaotic city and its face turned toward the river and the southern horizon. A deliberate architectural choice that prioritized the view over the reality of the street. At night, when the gas lamps of the city flickered like dying stars, the Savoy burned with a new, terrifying brilliance, illuminated by the nascent power of electricity, a beacon that drew the wealthy like moths to a flame that would eventually consume their secrets. The air around the entrance did not smell of the river's rot. It smelled of money, of fresh linen, and of the peculiar metallic scent of the first electric elevators in London, dubbed ascending rooms, because the very concept of being lifted by a machine was too alien, too terrifying, and too thrilling to be named plainly. One must visualize the opening night, the sheer audacity of it, as carriages clattered over the cobblestones, depositing men in white ties and women dripping in the plunder of the colonies, stepping out of the London fog and into a lobby that shone with the brightness of a surgical theater but felt like a cathedral. This was the hook. This was the trap. It was designed to be irresistible, a stage set where the actors were the guests and the script was written in banknotes and whispered indiscretions. The silence of the thick carpets absorbed the sound of footsteps, ensuring that one could move through the space without leaving an auditory trace, a feature that would become essential for the decades of affairs and covert diplomacy that followed. The Savoy was built on the premise that if you offer people enough gold leaf and marble, they will forget the world outside and, more importantly, they will feel safe enough to reveal their true selves. And that is when the real history begins, not in the public records but in the invisible ink of the hotel register. The psychological engine behind this marble leviathan was Richard D'Oyly Carte, a man whose mind was a complex tapestry of artistic ambition and ruthless commercial instinct. He was not a hotelier by birth or training. He was a man of the theater, the impresario behind the Gilbert and Sullivan operas, and he understood better than anyone that the aristocracy did not want reality. They wanted a performance. The Savoy was funded by the profits of the Mikado, built on the laughter of the public and the catchy rhythms of light opera. But D'Oyly Carte's vision was far darker and more obsessed with control. He looked across the Atlantic to America, seeing the rise of the great hotels in New York and Chicago, and he felt a deep, gnawing insecurity that London, the center of the world, was lagging behind in the art of living. He wanted to build a machine for living that would silence the American critics who sneered at British plumbing and drafty rooms. His drive was rooted in a need for perfection that bordered on the pathological. He was a man who could hear a wrong note in an orchestra of 50 and could spot a chipped teacup from across a dining room. He saw the hotel not as a service industry but as a theater where the curtain never came down, and the audience participated in the play. He demanded innovation at any cost, installing artesian wells to ensure the water was pure, building his own power generators because he did not trust the municipal supply, and creating a ventilation system that breathed for the building. But beneath this technocratic obsession lay a desire for acceptance. D'Oyly Carte was a man of the stage, often looked down upon by the landed gentry, and by building a palace that outshone their ancestral homes, he was forcing them to come to him, to sleep under his roof, to eat at his table. He was creating a neutral ground where the old blood of the aristocracy could mix with the new money of industry and the arts, a social experiment conducted in a laboratory of velvet and crystal. He knew that for the hotel to succeed, it had to be more than a place to sleep. It had to be a destination, a world unto itself where the rules of Victorian morality could be suspended, or at least bent, behind the closed doors of a private suite. The vision was grand, but it was also defensive. He was building a fortress against mediocrity, a place where the chaos of the world was ordered, sanitized, and presented back to the guest as a perfect, frictionless experience. It was a vision born of hubris, certainly, but also of a profound understanding of human vanity. He knew that if he built a pedestal high enough, people would pay a fortune just to stand on it for a night. To execute this vision, to turn the cold stone and steel into a living organism of service, D'Oyly Carte needed more than money. He needed a soul for his machine, and he found it in a partnership that would define the hospitality industry for the next century. He imported César Ritz as the general manager and Auguste Escoffier as the chef de cuisine, two men who were effectively artists of comfort and consumption. Ritz was the face, the diplomat, the man who knew the name of every duke and the preference of every courtesan, a man who treated service as a high religion. Escoffier was the alchemist in the basement, the man who revolutionized the kitchen, banishing the chaotic, medieval methods of cooking and replacing them with the brigade system, a military hierarchy of chefs that functioned with the precision of a watch. Together, they created the Savoy style, a level of luxury that was intoxicating. But this perfection came at a terrible human cost, a grinding reality of labor that was carefully hidden from the guests who dined on peach melba and sipped champagne. The hotel was a split reality, a classic upstairs-downstairs dichotomy where the subterranean levels were a hot, frantic factory of sweating bodies, shouting orders, and clanging metal, all to produce the illusion of effortless serenity on the floors above. The waiters were drilled like soldiers, their uniforms inspected for the slightest speck of dust, their movements choreographed to be invisible. They were the ghosts in the machine, essential but ignored, trained to see everything and say nothing. The cost of running this machine was astronomical, a furnace that burned money as quickly as it burned coal. Ritz was a perfectionist who believed that the guest should never see a bill that detailed the costs, only a total sum, a philosophy that encouraged extravagance but also masked the financial hemorrhage occurring behind the scenes. The hotel was a vampire, sucking in resources, rare orchids from the countryside, out-of-season fruits from the continent, ice imported from Norway, all to maintain the fantasy of eternal abundance. This was the era of the gilded cage, where the staff were prisoners of their employment, often living in cramped quarters within the hotel, their lives entirely subsumed by the rhythm of the service. They were the invisible army, the oil in the gears, and their silence was bought with steady wages and the fear of dismissal. The guests saw only the magic, the way a glass was refilled before it was empty, the way a fire was lit before the room grew cold. They did not see the exhaustion, the burns on the arms of the kitchen porters, or the sheer logistical terror of feeding and housing hundreds of the most demanding people on earth. The turning point of this initial golden era came not from an external war, but from an internal rot, a scandal that shattered the illusion of the happy family and revealed the predatory nature of the business. In 1897, the unthinkable happened. Ritz and Escoffier, the architects of the Savoy's fame, were accused of fraud. The investigation was discreet, conducted by the board of directors with the stealth of a state intelligence operation, because to admit that the greatest hotelier in the world was a thief would be to tarnish the brand irrevocably. The audit revealed a labyrinth of kickbacks, missing inventory, and wine cellars that were lighter than the ledgers claimed. Escoffier, the genius of the kitchen, was accused of taking commissions from suppliers, a common practice perhaps, but one that D'Oyly Carte used as a bludgeon. The dismissal was swift and brutal. They were escorted from the premises, the kings of luxury deposed in an afternoon. This event was the first crack in the facade, a realization that the men who created this paradise were not altruistic servants but mercenaries extracting their pound of flesh from the indulgent rich. It exposed the cynical underbelly of the service industry, where loyalty was a commodity and everyone had a price. The hotel, however, did not collapse. Like a biological entity that sheds a limb to survive, it simply closed the wound and moved on. The staff were ordered never to speak their names. The menus remained, the systems remained, but the men were erased. This ability to absorb scandal and remain standing became the Savoy's defining characteristic. It taught the British elite that the institution was more important than the individual. It didn't matter who ran the kitchen or who managed the desk, as long as the champagne was cold and the secrets were kept. The dismissal of Ritz and Escoffier was a lesson in power. The owner always wins, and the help, no matter how genius, are disposable. The hotel entered the new century not as a home for artists, but as a corporate entity, cold and impervious. It had survived its creators. It had eaten its parents. Now it was ready to consume the 20th century. The scandal was buried so deep in the archives that it would not fully resurface for decades. A skeleton in the closet of a building that had thousands of closets, each one holding a different skeleton. As the Victorian era gasped its last breath and the Edwardian dawn broke, the Savoy became the playground for a monarchy that had grown tired of mourning. King Edward VII, a man of prodigious appetites and questionable morals, found in the Savoy a home away from the stifling protocol of Buckingham Palace. The hotel adapted itself to his girth and his whims, creating a symbiotic relationship between the crown and the corporation that solidified its status as the unofficial annex of the state. This was the age of the gondola party, a night of such obscene extravagance that it became a legend of hubris. The courtyard was flooded, lined with blue silk to mimic the canals of Venice, and guests ate dinner floating on gondolas while swans swam around them. It was a spectacle that teetered on the edge of madness, a desperate attempt to stave off the boredom of unlimited wealth. But beneath the water and the silk, the infrastructure groaned. The logistics of flooding a courtyard in central London were a nightmare of engineering, a testament to the hotel's willingness to bend reality for the amusement of a few hundred people. It was beautiful, yes, but it was also grotesque. Outside the walls, the suffragettes were beginning to march, the labor unions were organizing, and the poor were starving. But inside, the champagne flowed like the fake canal water. The hotel became a bubble, a hermetically sealed environment where the impending social collapse was ignored. It was during these years that the Savoy cemented its reputation as a place of affairs. The king had his mistresses, and where the king led, the court followed. The suites became private theaters for adultery, facilitated by a staff who knew that a generous tip bought blindness. The architecture itself conspired to assist. The multiple exits, the soundproof walls, the discreet service elevators, all were utilized to ensure that husband and wife, or lover and rival, never crossed paths in the corridor. It was a choreography of deceit, played out on a stage of mahogany and brass. The hotel was not just witnessing history. It was enabling the moral decay of a class that was about to walk blindly into the slaughterhouse of the First World War. The decadence was feverish, a last hurrah before the lights went out across Europe, and the Savoy was the band playing on the deck of the Titanic, louder and faster, drowning out the sound of the ice cracking. When the war finally came in 1914, the lights of the Savoy did not go out, but they changed color. The golden glow of the Edwardian evening was replaced by a harder, steelier light. The ballrooms were still full, but the white ties were replaced by khaki uniforms. The hotel became a strange purgatory, a transit station between the muddy hell of the trenches and the memory of civilization. Officers on leave would rush to the Savoy, scraping the mud of Flanders from their boots before stepping onto the plush carpets, desperate to drink enough whiskey to forget the sound of the artillery. The hotel profited from this desperation. The bills kept coming, and they were paid by men who knew they might not live to see the next bank statement. It was a macabre prosperity. The American entry into the war brought a new energy, a brashness that clashed with the somber mood of the British establishment, and the Savoy became the mixing ground for this new alliance. The bar became the epicenter of information exchange, where spies whispered to diplomats and journalists eavesdropped on generals. The hotel was no longer just a playground. It was a node in the intelligence network. The staff, many of whom were foreign nationals, were watched closely. The fear of the enemy within permeated the grand halls. Waiters were suspected of being German agents. Chambermaids were scrutinized for listening at keyholes. The paranoia was palpable. The luxury was still there, but it felt brittle, fragile. The food rationing began to bite, and even Escoffier's successor struggled to make miracles out of potato flour and powdered eggs. Yet the facade had to be maintained. To let the standard slip would be to admit defeat. So the silver was polished until it gleamed like bayonets, and the music played on, a defiant, hollow sound against the backdrop of a generation being wiped out across the channel. The Savoy during the Great War was a study in cognitive dissonance, a place where one could eat a 5-course meal while reading the casualty lists. The tragedy of the world filtered through the heavy velvet curtains until it was just a distant murmur. The armistice brought relief but no return to the old world. The innocence was gone, replaced by the frenetic, manic energy of the jazz age. The Savoy embraced this new rhythm with the enthusiasm of a survivor. The Savoy Orpheans, the hotel's dance band, became the soundtrack of the 1920s. Their music broadcast across the nation by the BBC, turning the hotel into a myth that could be consumed by the working class in their living rooms. They couldn't afford a room, but they could dream of the Savoy. The hotel became a temple of the cocktail, with Harry Craddock, the American barman who fled Prohibition, compiling the Savoy Cocktail Book, a Bible of mixology that codified the art of getting drunk with style. But amidst the Charleston and the gin fizzes, a darkness lingered. The superstition of Casper the cat was born in this era. After a diamond magnate died shortly after a dinner party of 13 guests, the hotel commissioned a statue of a black cat to act as the 14th guest for any unlucky party. It was a whimsical solution to a morbid fear, a piece of Art Deco sculpture served with a napkin and a full place setting. It spoke to the deep anxieties of the wealthy, who felt that their luck was running out, that the universe was capricious and cruel. They needed a talisman, a wooden cat to ward off death. The 1920s at the Savoy were loud, fast, and desperate. The bright young things partied in the suites, breaking furniture and taboos with equal abandon. Drugs, specifically cocaine, began to circulate in the private parties, a white dust to match the white stone. The hotel was a permissive parent, indulgent and silent, as long as the check cleared. It was a time of beautiful people doing ugly things in beautiful rooms. The affairs became more public, more brazen. The paparazzi of the day camped outside the entrance, hungry for a glimpse of a fallen star. The hotel was no longer a fortress. It was a fishbowl. Then came the storm that would define the hotel's relationship with justice and race. The trial of Madame Fami. In 1923, within the walls of the Savoy, amidst a thunderstorm that shook the windows, Marguerite Fami shot her husband, the Egyptian Prince Ali Kamel Fami Bey. It was a sensation, a murder in the Savoy. The body lay on the floor of the corridor, the blood staining the carpet that had been walked upon by kings. The trial that followed was a masterclass in manipulation and prejudice. The defense painted the prince as a monster, a sexual pervert, playing on the racist tropes of the time to garner sympathy for the French wife. The hotel was the silent witness. The staff testified, revealing the violent arguments, the screams heard through the walls, the terror that had permeated their suite. But the hotel's reputation was protected. The focus was on the individuals, not the institution that had hosted their volatile union. Madame Fami was acquitted, a verdict that shocked the world and highlighted the different rules that applied to the rich and beautiful. She walked free, and the Savoy went back to business. The carpet was replaced. The room was relet. The ghost of the prince was just another story to be whispered in the bar. This event marked a shift. The hotel was now a place where life and death were traded, where a gunshot could be explained away as a crime of passion, and where justice was as flexible as the menu. It proved that the Savoy was a sovereign territory, a place where the laws of the street did not fully apply. The violence was absorbed into the fabric of the building, adding a layer of noir to the glamour. It was a reminder that beneath the tuxedo, the beast was always waiting. As the 1930s progressed, the shadows lengthened. The Great Depression chipped away at the fortunes of the guests, but the Savoy remained a beacon for those who had survived the crash. The politics, however, were darkening. The hotel became a meeting ground for the appeasers and the warnings. Winston Churchill founded the Other Club, a dining society that met in the Pinafore Room, a secret conclave of power where politicians from opposing parties could meet off the record. Here, amidst the cigar smoke and the brandy, the fate of the nation was debated. The Savoy was the anti-parliament, the place where the real decisions were made, away from the scrutiny of the voters. It was a club for the men who owned the world, and they trusted the hotel implicitly. They knew the waiters were deaf, the walls were thick, and the wine was excellent. But there were other guests, too. Nazi sympathizers, German diplomats, and spies moved through the lobby, observing, calculating. The tension was palpable. The hotel was a chessboard. You could see Ribbentrop dining in one corner and Churchill in another, the future of Europe hanging in the balance between the appetizers and the dessert. The staff were caught in the middle, serving both sides, maintaining the neutrality of Switzerland in the heart of London. It was a dangerous game. The management had to walk a tightrope, welcoming the German ambassador while knowing that his government was building the bombers that would soon target the city. The illusion of civilized diplomacy was maintained until the very last moment, until the day the declaration of war was read. The Savoy was the last place where the old world order pretended to still exist, a stage where enemies nodded to each other before going home to put on their uniforms. World War II transformed the Savoy into a fortress of defiance. When the Blitz began and London burned, the Savoy did not close. It adapted. The Abraham Lincoln Room was converted into a communal shelter for the guests, but this was no dank subway station. There were beds, partitions for privacy, and waiters in white jackets stepping over the sleeping bodies to deliver nightcaps. It was surreal. Outside, the sky was red with fire. Inside, the band played A Nightingale Sang in Berkeley Square. The hotel marketed itself as the safest building in London, a claim made of steel and hubris. The guests, a mix of displaced aristocrats, American journalists, and government officials, formed a strange, siege mentality community. They were the survivors of the apocalypse, drinking champagne in the bunker. The Other Club continued to meet, Churchill often arriving straight from the war rooms, his face gray with fatigue, seeking the solace of the hotel's normalcy. The Savoy became a symbol of British resistance, a refusal to let Hitler dictate the terms of dinner. But the danger was real. A bomb blast nearby shattered all the windows on the riverside, filling the rooms with glass and freezing air. The guests simply moved to the corridor. The defiance was theatrical, but it was also brave. The American correspondents, led by Edward R. Murrow, broadcast from the hotel, their voices carrying the sound of the sirens to the living rooms of America, framing the Savoy as the headquarters of the free world's observation post. Murrow would stand on the roof, watching the bombs fall, describing the destruction with a poet's eye, before going downstairs to order a steak. The contrast was jarring, the death from the sky and the life in the grill room. The hotel became a character in the war, a stubborn old dowager who refused to leave her home, putting on her makeup even as the roof caved in. The war also solidified the hotel's role in intelligence. The Special Operations Executive, SOE, and MI5 had agents who used the hotel as a base for meetings with contacts. The starlight signals from the roof were rumored to guide planes, or confuse them. The staff, now depleted by the draft, were a mix of elderly retainers and refugees, each with a story, each with a secret. The kitchen, struggling with rationing, became a laboratory of deception, creating Woolton pies, vegetable pies, that were served on silver platters as if they were delicacies. The ability to maintain the form of luxury without the substance was the ultimate test of the Savoy's training. It was a performance of morale. If the Savoy could keep going, then England could keep going. The turning point of the war, the entry of the Americans, turned the hotel into Little America. The lobby was filled with GIs and officers. The accents shifted. The music became swing. The hotel was occupied by its allies. The dollar replaced the pound as the currency of influence. The Savoy adapted again, becoming the transatlantic bridgehead. The old Victorian stiff upper lip was loosened by American optimism and Chesterfield cigarettes. It was a time of intense, hurried romances, of desperate proposals made in the elevator, of widows receiving telegrams at the front desk. The emotional weight of the building grew heavier with every night of the bombing. It absorbed the grief and the relief, the terror and the joy, becoming a repository of the city's wartime soul. As the smoke of the war cleared, a new era of austerity gripped Britain, but the Savoy fought to bring back the glitter. It was here, in 1946, that a young Princess Elizabeth, the future queen, made her first public appearance with Philip Mountbatten at a wedding reception. The hotel was the stage for the monarchy's return to visibility. The photographers captured them, young and hopeful, against the backdrop of the Savoy's renewed splendor. It was a signal that the gray years were ending. But the hotel was also facing a new enemy, the decline of the British Empire. The wealth that had built the Savoy was drying up. The colonies were breaking away. The guests were no longer maharajas and viceroys. They were businessmen and film stars. The nature of power was changing, and the hotel had to pivot. The cinema era brought Hollywood to the Strand. Charlie Chaplin, who had once stayed at the Savoy as a conquering hero, returned in the 1950s facing persecution from the U.S. government for his politics. The hotel became his sanctuary, his fortress against the McCarthy witch hunts. The press besieged the entrance, but the Savoy protected its own. The loyalty of the staff to the guest was absolute. They shielded Chaplin, misled the reporters, and gave him the privacy he needed to weep for his lost America. It was a reminder that the Savoy was still a place of refuge for the exiled, a neutral ground where art trumped politics. But the building was aging. The pipes rattled, the velvet was worn, the cost of labor was rising. The old model of hundreds of invisible servants was becoming economically impossible. The hotel was a dinosaur in a world of jet travel and motels. It began to look tired, a grand old dame with too much makeup, trying to hide the wrinkles. The Cold War brought a different kind of chill to the corridors. The spies were back, but this time they were Russian and American, playing a deadly game of cat and mouse. The Profumo affair in the 1960s, a scandal involving sex, spies, and government ministers, had threads that ran through the London social scene, and the Savoy was never far from the whispers. It was the place where the establishment met to manage the crisis, to decide who would fall on their sword. The establishment, that nebulous network of power, used the Savoy as its boardroom. But the world was changing faster than the hotel could keep up. The cultural revolution of the 60s happened outside the doors. The Beatles and the Stones were the new royalty, and while they visited, they didn't revere the Savoy. They treated it as a prop. The deference was gone. The hotel struggled to understand this new generation that didn't care about dressing for dinner. The management tried to enforce dress codes, fighting a losing battle against denim and long hair. It was a clash of civilizations. The Savoy represented the old guard, the stiff collar, the silent servant. The street outside represented the new chaos. The friction was palpable. The hotel felt like a museum piece, a relic of a time when everyone knew their place. It was in danger of becoming irrelevant, a mausoleum for a dead way of life. The 1970s and 80s were the dark ages for the hotel's soul. Corporate ownership battles, strikes, and financial instability plagued the institution. The machine that D'Oyly Carte built was rusting. The personal touch was replaced by corporate efficiency. The invisible army of staff became unionized workers demanding rights. The magic was fading. The hotel was sold, bought, and sold again. It became an asset on a balance sheet, not a family legacy. The guests could feel the difference. The flowers were a little less fresh, the carpets a little more threadbare. It was surviving on its name, on the echo of its history. Yet, even in decline, it held a mystique. It was still the place where Margaret Thatcher came to celebrate her victories, the Iron Lady finding kinship with the iron determination of the building. It was where the deals of the privatization era were struck, where the City of London's new wealth came to flaunt itself. The Big Bang of the financial markets brought a new wave of money, loud, aggressive, and lacking the subtle grace of the Edwardian era. The Savoy took their money, but it seemed to sneer at them. The building had a memory. It remembered true elegance, and this wasn't it. The decadence of the 80s was plastic compared to the gold of the 1890s. The hotel was a mirror reflecting the coarsening of society. It was no longer a palace of the people. It was a fortress for the rich, surrounded by a city that was increasingly divided. By the turn of the millennium, the Savoy was tired. It needed more than a coat of paint. It needed a resurrection. In 2007, it closed its doors for the first time in its history for a massive restoration. The auction of the contents was a public wake. Thousands of items, chandeliers, beds that had slept prime ministers, ashtrays that had held the cigars of Churchill, were sold to the highest bidder. It was a dismantling of history. Seeing the hotel stripped bare was shocking. It revealed the bones of the building, the steel girders and the brickwork, stripping away the illusion. It showed that the magic was just scenery. The renovation was plagued by delays and cost overruns, the budget ballooning to over £200 million. It seemed as if the building was fighting back, refusing to be tamed, revealing rot and structural damage that had been hidden for a century. It was the final bill for decades of excess. The restoration was a gamble. Could you rebuild a soul? Could you install modern air conditioning and Wi-Fi without killing the ghosts? When it reopened, it was shinier, brighter, cleaner. The Beaufort Bar was built on the old cabaret stage, a dark, black and gold cavern of hedonism. The rooms were flawless, but something had changed. The silence was different. It was the silence of a high-end showroom, not the heavy, secret-laden silence of the old Savoy. The modern Savoy is a tribute to its former self, a theme park of luxury for the global elite. The guests are now Russian oligarchs, Middle Eastern royalty, and tech billionaires. The power dynamics have shifted east. The hotel adapts as it always has. It serves tea to the tourists and vodka to the billionaires. But the shadows are still there. If you walk the corridors late at night, when the vacuum cleaners are humming and the lights are dimmed, you can almost hear the echo of the past. The laughter of the suffragettes, the clinking of the glasses during the Blitz, the whispers of the Spies. The Savoy is not just a hotel. It is a witness box. It has seen the best and the worst of us. It has seen the fragility of power and the endurance of greed. It stands as a monument to the British ability to package class and sell it back to the world. It teaches us that history is not something that happens in books. It happens in rooms behind closed doors, where the decisions are made that shape our lives. The legacy of the Savoy is the legacy of the city itself. A relentless drive to survive, to reinvent, to mask the decay with beauty. It is a place where the truth is always the most expensive item on the menu. The palace by the Thames remains, a beautiful, indifferent observer of the human comedy. It doesn't care about the morality of its guests, only their ability to pay. In the end, the Savoy is a mirror. We look into its polished surfaces and see our desire for importance, our fear of mortality, and our desperate need to be remembered. The building will outlast us all. The stone is patient, the river keeps flowing, and the revolving doors keep turning, spinning the same stories of power, affairs, and secrets over and over again until the end of time. The trap is still set. The lights are still on. The Savoy is waiting. The paradox remains unresolved. We are drawn to the Savoy because we want to be part of the elite, to touch the hem of history, but the price of admission is our own authenticity. We put on the mask as soon as we enter the lobby. We become actors in D'Oyly Carte's play. The hotel demands a performance. It demands that we stand straighter, speak softer, and pretend that the world outside, the poverty, the chaos, the noise, does not exist. It is a seductive lie, and that is why it endures. Because the truth is exhausting, and for a few £100 a night, the Savoy promises that you can lay your burden down, provided you pick up the bill in the morning. The machinery of luxury grinds on, fueled by the labor of the invisible and the vanity of the visible. The ascending room rises, taking us up to the stars, leaving the mud of the river far below, suspended in a golden box, safe, for a moment, from the fall that awaits us all. Ultimately, the Savoy is a study in the architecture of control. Every sightline, every lighting fixture, every uniform is designed to curate an emotional response. Controls how you feel about yourself. It makes the small feel big and the powerful feel safe. It is a psychological weapon wrapped in silk. The affairs were not just lapses in judgment. They were products of an environment designed to suspend consequence. The state secrets were shared there because the environment mimicked the sanctity of a confessional. The trust of the elite was earned not through morality, but through complicity. The Savoy was an accomplice to the 20th century. It held the coat of the murderer, poured the wine for the dictator, and made the bed for the adulterer. And it did it all with a smile and a bow. That is the dark heart of hospitality. It serves the sinner as attentively as the saint. It does not judge. It only serves. And in that lack of judgment, in that terrified neutrality, lies the true darkness of the Savoy. It is the silence of the valet who sees the blood on the shirt and asks only if Sir would like it laundered. So, as we stand on the embankment today, looking up at the Art Deco sign glowing against the London rain, we are looking at a tomb and a temple. A tomb for the reputations lost and the secrets buried, and a temple to the god of materialism. The Savoy is a beautiful monster. It has eaten the lives of thousands of workers and swallowed the fortunes of thousands of guests. It stands on the edge of the river like a predator that has just fed, sleek, satisfied, and utterly remorseless. It is the ultimate expression of the British Empire, magnificent, cold, and built on a foundation of things it would rather not discuss. The story of the Savoy is the story of us. Our desire for beauty, our capacity for deception, and our unending quest to build castles in the sky, even as the ground beneath our feet turns to mud. The neon sign buzzes. The doorman tips his hat. The revolving door spins. Enter if you dare. The performance is about to begin.